Presenting
The Complete
Orson Welles
and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London.
as the third man.
Stand by.
We'll be on the air in 15 seconds, Mr. Wells. Yes, I know.
Stand by, everybody.
Mercury Theater on the Air presents Orson Welles as Count Dracula in his own version of Bram Stoker's great novel, Dracula.
What evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Hello world, welcome to The Complete Orson Welles, brought to you by Dwayne Old Time Radio. This podcast will feature various classic radio programs ranging mostly from 1936 to 1952 that Orson either produced and directed, was featured on, or starred as a guest. If you enjoy my podcast, you can subscribe to receive notifications of new posts. Subscribing is free and only takes a moment. New episodes are posted weekly. If inclined, please leave a rating and or review on your preferred podcast service. Thank you for your support. Hope you enjoyed the genius of Mr. Welles. Let's listen to one episode from the Orson Welles show, otherwise known as Lady Esther. It's two stories in one. The first story is That's Why I Left You. The second story is The Maysville Minstrel. This is the sixth episode of Lady Esther, aka the Orson Welles show. In this play aired November 10th, 1941. Blech.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles, bringing you another radio show for Lady Esther. With us tonight are Stuart Erwin, June Collier, Joseph Cotten, Agnes Moorehead, and Ray Collins, who's going to do a little narrating on our first story, which incidentally is a romance.
Romance. The songwriters insist that romance is something that takes place in moonlit gardens, by scented lagoons, and on assorted verandas. But as a matter of fact, romance is a thing that lives wherever a man and woman love one another.
The setting for this romance, for example, is the living room of a three-room apartment in Chicago on a cold and rainy wintry evening. 3 rooms. Bedroom, kitchenette, 2x4 living room. Extra bed comes down from the wall. Either falls down when you're giving a dinner party, or else you practically have to blast it from the wall when you have to put the children to bed in it. You pay $42.50 a month. No extras. $5 down, $5 a month for the rug, the refrigerator, dining room set, and the gas range. There's a gray carpet running down the hall, and somebody out there always seems to be boiling cauliflower. Don't we all know?
It is a gray, drizzling night. The 2 small kids are playing noisily in the middle of the crowded floor. In the 2x4 kitchenette, their young mother has just finished the dishes and has hung the towel over the radiator to dry. Then she comes into the living room, taking off her apron as she walks. We see that she is a lovely, dark-haired girl, but her face is weary. Her pretty hands are rough from housework. Then she stops, stares at something, for under the hall door has been pushed a thick envelope. A moment later, she has picked it up and, seated on the arm of the overstuffed sofa, she slowly begins to read. It's a typed letter, and it simply begins, Dearest Mary.
Dearest Mary, now I can tell you why I left you. It's not that I didn't love you. You were the children. It's just that there was something I'd wanted all my life. A chance to travel. Do you remember that when we met at the office and fell in love, I'd saved up $1,000 for my trip? How we decided that after all it was better to get married first and wait a few years? Then the babies came, and pretty soon the money was gone. But you were wonderful. What it meant to you to be cooped up in 3 rooms all day without pretty clothes and good times, you never told me. And we were happy, weren't we, Mary? Even though when you were as young as we were, marriage is always a perpetual combination of heaven and hell. Because after the insurance premium is taken out, there's just enough left for 2 movies between paydays and a poker game down the hall at Bill's apartment, and having Bill and his wife in for supper once a month. So we make up for being poor by loving each other intensely and hug each other in the kitchen and pile into the easy chair tight together and clutch each other's hands between the neat little twin beds. Sometimes we dance together when the radio music reminds us that we're still young, after all. Then the quarreling, Mary. The quarreling. Twice a month we clear the dining room table and sit down with a paycheck in front of us. Then it begins. Why didn't I remember to say I'd borrowed $2 from Bill and lost at the office football pool? If you'd followed the menus like it says in the magazines, would have known we were $4 over at the butcher's. If I skipped the last payment on my typewriter, you ask, whatever happened to the money? And then, Mary, I'd think it was going on and on forever. Because when we fought over the bills, I'd get the terrible thought that we'd be fighting over the bills 20 years from then. And I think, well, face it, as I can't be the bright boy at the office, I don't even do my job as well as the dumbbells around me. Why? Because I want to write stories. Stories about adventure and traveling crazy places we'll never even see. I want to write. All the time I know that for every man who comes into the personnel office for a job, there are 1,000 writers over the city trying to get jobs. But, Mary, it wasn't that. Because that was just the bitter side. I wasn't going to give up. But when every year of your life since we were out of high school, you've been saying to yourself, next year I'll do it. Next year I'll travel over the world. And that next year never comes. And the black moods are on you. The 3-room apartment becomes a prison. You get to know each other with frightening nearness, seeing and hearing and touching each other in the crowded little rooms, your very clothes mixed up and touching each other in the same drawer, and even all the foolish keepsakes of your 2 pasts, old dance programs and snapshots tightly lying together in the old cardboard suit boxes at the back of the cloak closet. And that December night on my birthday, I came home from the office. You had a surprise gift for me. You remember it? Something I'd always wanted. That big globe of the world. Well, Mary, I sat over it for hours that night, spinning it round and round, dreaming of being on the deck of some old tramp steamer, sailing across those seas, watching the palms of Coconut Islands rising out of the horizon. It was too much for me, Mary. It was too much. That's why that night, after the children were in bed and you were wearily sleeping after your long day, I slipped to my feet, packed a bag, and tiptoed down the hall, out of your life forever. That is why I left you.
The girl let the first pages of that long letter slip to the floor, and for a moment raised her head, gazed in deep tenderness across the room. Then her face dropped down over the pages again.
I've wandered over the entire globe since then, Mary. I went to see if the sands of the Tahitian beaches were really black. I saw the Southern Cross. I drove dog sleds in Alaska. And one day, as I was working on a tramp steamer, I saw a low cloud on the horizon, but the mate said it wasn't a cloud, it was land. Java Head, Mary. Java Head. The other side of the earth from Chicago. Then we docked at a funny island port. The wharf was swarming with chocolate-colored people who wore wrap-around skirts they called sarongs, and the harbor was filled with ships from every spot on the globe. This was what I'd always wanted, Mary. This was one of those far places that we used to read about in books and see in the movies. I was there, Mary. I walked its streets. Don't you see now why I left you? Because in Java, I got into the coffee business. We did well. I made a lot of money. A lot of money. Finally, I bought a yacht, decided to cruise around the world again. Only a hurricane caught us off Sumatra, and we were wrecked on a desert island. Oh, Mary, what a beautiful island that was. A lost island that's just an unnamed pinpoint on the globe. A lagoon as blue as turquoise. The surf crashing the reef as white as whipped cream. Enormous cocoa palms bending out over the shores. The natives singing and playing their guitars. And the moon. Oh, Mary. We never had such a moon back in Chicago. It was as white as silver, so bright you could read a book at midnight. Then, Mary, after 9 years, I was picked up at last and brought to New York. Came west. And only this evening, Mary, I walked right down the street past the old apartment house where we used to live once. That's what made me write this letter. But, Mary, I'll never return again. Why did you give me that globe?
The young woman had now come to the last page. The sheets of paper had fluttered down around her feet. She seemed oblivious of anything in that room. And very slowly, she read the final paragraph.
Tonight, I'm near home. Not far from you now, Mary. And I decided when I wrote this letter that I'd be off before dawn. I know a fellow who wants to run some guns down to a certain spot near Yucatan. He thinks I'm the man for the job. And then I thought of the children. I wondered what they looked like now, Mary. I remembered the tiny apartment that you'd struggled so hard to turn into a home. And I remembered how utterly delicious you looked when you were reading a book by the fire. So I decided that I'd push this letter under the door and wait until you'd read it. Could you possibly forgive me, Mary? All you have to do is speak. For now you know why I left you.
Mary looked up and smiled across the room.
Listen, you idiot. Come over here and put your arms around me. Of course I forgive you.
Oh, so you've read it.
And this is what you've been writing all evening. Well, if this is what happens when I give you a birthday present, I think I'll have your head examined.
Well, I wanted a good globe of the world all my life. It kind of set my imagination going.
I suppose I ought to tell you that it isn't as expensive as it looks. I just bought it out of the house money. You see, I found it in Marshall Field's basement, and it's one of the globes that they had before the war, so some of those European countries aren't just right. So they just marked it way down, so I just calmly bought it.
Yeah, it's a peach of a globe, all right.
Honey, do all men have ideas like that when they spin a globe around?
I suppose so, sweet.
And do you really want to go adventuring as badly as all that?
Oh, I suppose any $30 a week fella does have certain dreams.
And now, because of me and the children, you'll never be able to make this romantic journey, will you?
That's right, Mary. You see, it's because of the children and you that I don't really want to.
Do you happen to be aware of the fact that I love you very much?
Yes. You see, that's the point. Thus, the little story, which happens to be true, of the way a man went adventuring without leaving a 3-room apartment in the windy city of Chicago. Joe and Mary and the kids are the people whose stories will fill our minds 1,000 years from now. For it's their adventures that really count. The rest of it, the flaming headlines of these hours are, after all, records of a sickness, a fleeting thing. That was an original story written especially for this program by John Nesbitt, of John Nesbitt's Passing Parade. To keep the record clear, it's called That's Why I Left You. Second part of our program is a story by Ring Lardner, and our stars are Stuart, Erwin, June Collyer, and Joseph Cotten. And now first, here's a word from Lady Esther.
Can anything be softer, smoother than a baby's skin? Those of you who have a baby, just go over and touch its skin. Then touch your own skin and compare them. Do you notice how wonderfully smooth your baby's skin is? Does your own feel like that? Or do you feel little bumps, little dry, rough spots? Now, if I were to tell you your skin could feel as smooth as a baby's, it would be a little hard to believe. And it would be just as hard to believe your skin could look like a baby's, could look as fresh and firm and fine-textured. But you know, in hundreds of letters I've received, that's exactly what women tell me. One woman put it in these words. Lady Esther, she wrote, "After I used your four-purpose face cream, my husband said, 'Darling, your skin looks and feels just like a baby's.'" You see, many women do too much for their skin. They use a different preparation for every purpose. And too many different kinds of preparations may work against each other, may disagree with the skin. But Lady Esther four-purpose face cream ends the need for all other creams and lotions. This one cream takes care of four very important needs of your skin. Yes, Lady Esther four-purpose face cream is complete in itself. It cleanses your skin, softens it, relieves dryness and flaking, leaves your skin so smooth that powder and makeup go on beautifully. So if you want a thrill when you touch your skin, start using Lady Esther four-purpose face cream. See how quickly it makes your skin feel soft and smooth as a baby's.
And now here's the second part of our program, a story by Ring Lardner called The Maysville Minstrel with Stuart, Erwin, June Collier, Joseph Cotten, and Ray Collins. This is a story about a man who wrote bad poetry. Gosh, awful bad poetry, which is to say it's a story about almost all of us. Surely there are few whose pasts are not embarrassed by some few feet of perfectly horrible versification. I offer Stephen Gale by way of comfort. I do very much hope I'm right in saying that Stephen Gale writes or wrote worse poetry than any of us. Stephen Gale was one of the two men who made up the office force of the Maysville Gas Company. Among other things, he was the bill collector, and he wasn't good at the job. He had 2 children and a wife, Stella, and he was always in debt. So he couldn't blame other people for not settling when he was stalling off creditors himself. They were too poor to go to the movies, so Stella and Stephen stayed home, and often after Stella had gone to bed, Stephen would sit up and write that poetry. He wrote a poem for her on one of her birthdays.
To Stella. Stella, you today are 23 years old, and yet your hair is still pure gold. Stella, they tell me your name in Latin means a star, and to me that is what you are. With your eyes and your hair so yellow, I rate myself a lucky fella, Stella. You know I cannot afford a costly gift. As you know, it costs us all I make to live. And, as you know, we are already in debt. But if you will stay well and healthy until I am rich and wealthy, maybe I could be more able then to give you a present, better than I can at present. So now, Stella, goodbye for the present, and I hope next year I can make things more pleasant. May you live to be old and ripe and mellow, is my kind birthday wish for you, Stella.
Oh, Stephen, that's wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Stella.
You ought to quit that darned old gas company and write poetry for a living.
Oh, no, Stella. I'm as poor now as I ever want to be.
There was a man named Charlie Roberts who traveled out of New York for an instantaneous water heater concern. He had a tip that old man Townsend, the owner of the gas company, would be in town today, so he stopped off in Maysville.
How are you, Mr. Roberts?
Hello there, Gale. I heard old man Townsend was here.
You've missed him. Left for Haines City last night. He's hard to keep track of.
It's hard to sell, too. But I'll run over there and take a chance. What's this you're reading?
Oh, I got it from the library.
How do you like it?
I'm not strong for poetry that don't rhyme.
I guess it's easier to write.
Oh, I don't believe so. Isn't much trouble rhyming if you've got it in you. I've tried it myself.
Oh, so you're a poet, are you?
Oh, I wouldn't exactly claim that, but I've written a few verses, and it was more like fun than work.
I'd like to read them, Gale.
Oh, I don't know if I'd like you to or not, and I don't know if I've saved any. I wrote a poem for the Maysville Gas Company.
Have you got it with you?
Oh, I don't know as I do. Oh, yes. Here it is.
Read it, Gale.
The gas business. The Maysville Gas Company has 800 meters. The biggest consumer in town is Mrs. Arnold Peters, who owns the big house on Taylor Hill and is always giving parties, come who will. Our collections amount to about $2,600 per month, 5% discount if paid before the 10th of the month. Mr. Townsend, the owner, considers people a fool who do not at least use gas for fuel. As for lighting, he claims it beats electricity, as electric storms often cut off the electricity, and when you have no light at night and have to burn candles all night, this is hardly right. Especially if you have company who will ask you, what is the matter with the electricity? So patronize the gas company, which storms do not affect, and your friends will have no reason to object.
Do you mean to tell me that it was no trouble to write that?
Oh, it only took me less than a half hour.
Listen, let me have it.
Well, what do you want with it?
I can get it published for you.
Where at?
In the New York Post. I've got a friend, Leonard Lyons, who'd run it in his column. He doesn't pay anything, but if this was printed and your name signed to it, it might attract attention from people who do pay for poetry. Then you could make a lot of money on the side.
How much do they pay?
Well, some of the big magazines pay as high as $1 a line.
I forget how many lines there is in that.
17.
17.
And from what I've seen of Old Townsend, I bet he doesn't pay you much more a week.
And it only took me less than a half hour to write it.
Will you let me send it to Leonard Lyons?
I don't know if I've got another copy.
Your wife must have a copy.
Well, I guess maybe she has. Here's a poem I wrote her on her birthday.
I'll mail these to Lyons tonight, along with a note. If he prints them, I'll send you the paper.
I've got one that's even longer than that.
You have?
Well, no, I guess I better hang on to it if your friend don't pay for them.
You're absolutely right. A man's a sucker to work for nothing. You keep your other stuff till this is published and you hear from some magazine editor. I'm sure you will.
You think I can make a living at it?
Living? If you can make $17 in half an hour, that's $34 an hour, or how many hours do you put in here?
10.
$340 a day. If that isn't living, I'm selling manicure sets to fish.
Oh, I couldn't keep up no such pace. I have to wait for inspiration.
Yeah, $1 a line would be enough inspiration to me. Other times when you didn't feel like doing it yourself, you could hire somebody to do it for you.
That wouldn't be square, and people would know the difference anyway. It's hard to imitate another man's style. I've tried.
You don't need to. Your own style is just as good as anybody's.
Oh.
Stephen was wild to tell Stella what had happened, but he was afraid this Lyons might not like the poem as well as Roberts had, might not think it worth publishing, and she'd be disappointed. But he didn't have to wait long. In less than a week, he received by mail from New York a copy of the Post, and in Leonard Lyons' column was his verse with his name signed to it and a caption reading, "To Stella, a Maysville minstrel gives his missus a birthday treat."
Why does he call you a minstrel?
Oh, he must have heard some way about that show we did that night at the Elks. I've got another one already.
Oh, Stephen, read it to me.
The Lackawanna Railroad. The Lackawanna Railroad, where does it go? It goes from Jersey City to Buffalo. Some of the trains stop at Maysville, but they are few. Most of them go right through, except the 822 going west. But the 1012 bound for Jersey City, that is the train we like the best, as it takes you to Jersey City, where you can take a ferry or a tube for New York City. Sometimes they run late, but that does not make so much difference with a freight, except the people who have to wait for their freight. Maysville people patronize the interurban, especially the farmers, so the interurban cuts into the business of the Lackawanna. But if you are going to New York City or Buffalo, the Lackawanna is the way to go. We'll say in conclusion that we consider it an honor that the city of Maysville is on the Lackawanna.
Wonderful, Stephen. Wonderful.
No, thank you, Stella.
But you are cheating yourself, dear. The poem, the way you've got it, it's 19 lines, or $19 if they really pay $1 a line. But it would be almost double the amount if you'd fix the lines different.
How do you mean?
Well, look. Look at your first line here.
Hmm?
The Lackawanna Railroad, where does it go? See, one line.
Yes.
Now, look. Suppose you wrote it this way. The Lackawanna Railroad, one line. Where does it go? Another line, see? Then that's two instead of one.
Oh, I don't know, Stella. That doesn't seem exactly fair. A little too easy.
3 days later, a special delivery came for Stephen. It said,
Dear Mr. Gale, on September 2nd, there was a poem entitled To Stella in the New York Post. The poem was signed by you. It impressed me greatly, and if you have written or will write others as good, our magazine will be glad to buy them, paying you $1 a line. Please let... $1 a line. Please let me hear from you and send along any poems you may have on hand. Sincerely, Robert Charles, editor, Charles Weekly, New York City, N.Y.
Stephen had never heard of Charles Weekly and didn't notice that the letter was postmarked Philadelphia and written on the stationery of a Philadelphia hotel. He rushed to his house, addressed and mailed the railroad verse, and after a brief and excited conference with Stella, decided to resign his job.
Stephen, I'll raise you to $24.
I'm not asking for a raise, Mr. Townsend. I've got to quit so I can devote all my time to poetry.
But Stephen found it next to impossible to write, while the fate of the verse he had sent was uncertain. He was able to make only a feeble start on a new one.
The Delaware River. Not a great many miles from Maysville is the Delaware River, but there is no fish in this part of the river. The upper part of the river is narrow and shallow, but they claim it is much wider near Philadelphia. It's not very good.
On the 20th, the envelope he had mailed to Charles Weekly containing the Lackawanna Railroad and the gas business was returned from New York. There were several inscriptions stamped on it, such as "not found" and "not in directory" and "no such person." And it dawned on Stephen that he was the victim of quite a joke.
Good morning, Mr. Townsend.
Well, how's the poultry coming? Getting rich?
Well, Mr. Townsend, I wonder...
I see. Well, Gail, I'll take you back at your old salary.
My old salary? Thank you, Mr. Townsend.
Oh, that's all right. But now, let's have any more foolishness. Get out now and try and coax a little money out of that Harper woman. She ain't paid a nickel for 8 months.
Mr. Townsend, I wanted to speak to you about those instantaneous water heaters.
You mean the ones Charlie Roberts sells?
Yes, sir. Those ones.
Well, what about them?
I was going to advise you not to buy them. They eat up too much gas.
Oh, they eat up too much gas, do they? Well, thanks for your advice, but I ordered some for Roberts in Haines City. I told him to send half a dozen of them here.
Well, all I can say is I hope Mr. Roberts comes down here to Maysville to demonstrate them.
That was the Maysville Minstrel by Ring Lardner. Stuart Erwin was Stephen, June Collyer. Stuart's wife was Stella, Stephen's wife.
Hey, excuse me, Orson.
Yes, Stu.
What was all that about wives?
Just my way of saying that June Collyer is your wife both in the story and in real life.
You had me confused for a minute. Sounded sort of like bigamy or like that. This is the way I'd say it. To June, I want you to remember, though it's actually November, and it soon will be December, that it's always, always, always June for me. You may be my wife in fiction with a slightly altered diction, but real wife or fiction, I love you.
Oh, Stuart, that's wonderful.
Well, thank you, June.
You ought to quit this darned old show business and write poetry for a living.
Oh, I wouldn't do that, Stuart. The cast of the Maysville Minstrel also included Joseph Cotten as Roberts and Ray Collins as Townsend. Now, before we go on, here's a word from Lady Esther.
You know, you have one friend who never lies to you, never fools you, never flatters you. A friend who always tells you the truth. I mean, your mirror. So look in your mirror and see what it tells you about your skin. If you can see little lines and blemishes, if you can see blackheads and big pores, isn't it time to change your method of skin care? Remember that Lady Esther Face Cream does not one, but all these 4 important things for your skin. First, it thoroughly cleanses your skin. Second, it softens your skin and relieves dryness. Third, it helps nature refine the pores. And fourth, it smooths your skin, prepares it for makeup. So if you want a modern, simplified method of skin care that helps soften and smooth your skin after the very first application, use Lady Esther 4-Purpose Face Cream.
Today is November 10th, 1941. Right now I want to say that Bernard Herrmann composes the music for this show and also conducts it. I didn't mention that last week, and if I should happen to mention it or forget to mention it next week or any time after that, please bear it in mind. November 10th, 1941. It's the birthday of both Martin Luther and Mohammed. It's also the birthday of Oliver Goldsmith. Goldsmith, as you know, wrote fine poetry and beautiful plays, but he was notorious as a miserable creature in conversation. Dr. Johnson and his Boswell, a man incidentally named Boswell, discussed Goldsmith's failing quite often.
Dr. Johnson, How do you value Goldsmith as a conversationalist?
Sir, he is so much afraid of being unnoticed that he often talks merely lest you forget that he is in the company. The misfortune of Goldsmith in conversation is this. He goes on without knowing how he is to get off.
Boswell in the dialogue just concluded was played by Stuart, Erwin, and Joseph Cotten. That sly, young, romantic leading man was Dr. Sam Johnson. Besides Goldsmith, 4 other literary masters have their birthdays this week. A German, Friedrich Schiller, a Frenchman, Alfred de Musset, a Russian, Fyodor Dostoevsky, and a Scot, Robert Louis Stevenson.
Robert Louis Stevenson?
That's right. Favorite of yours?
Well, I should say so, but not because of his book.
What then?
An epigram.
How does it go?
Evil was called youth till he was old. Then he was called habit.
Very much to the point, Ray. I think it'll bear repeating.
Evil was called youth till he was old, and then he was called habit.
Thank you, Ray Collins. And
Evil was called youth till he was old.
Now, if there are no more epigrams, I should like to point out a final startling fact about this week. It marks the birthdays of 3 of the greatest figures the American stage has ever had. Edwin Booth, the tragedian whose younger brother shot Lincoln. Maud Adams, who was Peter Pan, inquired of countless audiences if they believed in fairies and left a mark on a whole generation. And John Drew, that wonderfully self-possessed uncle of what I almost call the unholy Barrymore Trinity. In view of all this overwhelming evidence in our almanac, I'd like to advise any little children who want to be men of God, men of letters, or men of the theater, that this is without a doubt the week to be born. Well, our time's up now, but just before we say goodbye, I'd like to ask you specially to try not to miss this program next week, because we've a new and unusual and I think a very exciting story for you. Don't think you've ever heard anything quite like it before. I do believe you'll enjoy it. Until then, speaking for Lady Esther and for all of us on the Mercury Theater, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is the Columbia Broadcasting System. KNX Columbia Square, Los Angeles.
Thank you for listening to and showing your support for my podcast. If you would like to receive notifications of when new episodes are posted, please subscribe to my channel. Subscriptions are 100% free, and they really help me get an idea of how I'm doing. Well, hope you enjoyed, and until next time, stay safe, wish you well, and as always, peace.